My name's David Barclay, and it's June the 1st, 2005, and we're at 131 Fort Street, Salt Spring Island, BC, Canada. And I'm a Canadian citizen, born in February 4, 1944, and my wife is Gail M. Barclay. She was born on January the 28th, 1953. We've been married since July the 5th, 1969, and Gail is a survivor of Canadian military medical experimentation, which began in September 1954 and continued until sometime in early 1984. During the last 20 years, I've been a full-time caregiver to Gail. I've also spent hundreds of hours with Gail and Dr. Larry Pastor of Victoria, BC. It's involved in her treatment and psychotherapy, and I have been witness to her testimony concerning her childhood abuse that she suffered on Canadian military bases in Calgary, Alberta, Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and later in private residences in Victoria, British Columbia. And this all goes back to 1954 when she was 20 months old. She was brought from Ottawa, Ontario, to Calgary, Alberta, to the Lincoln Park Air Force Base, and she was put into an experimentation program to study the long-term effects of trauma. During the initial stages, Gail was taught the colors, numbers, identities of people and races and nationalities, and so that when she could be properly subjected to stimulus that would direct her consciousness in a specific direction, so that in the years following she would respond to colors and numbers and people of certain specific nationalities. And once she had established that she could comprehend what was being told her and what she was being instructed, she was subjected to abusive torture, which took the form of a mental, psychological, physical, and sexual torture, deprivation in the form of deprived of food, water, clothing, human companionship. She was isolated at times in a wooden box, kept in total darkness. She was also subjected to water torture, which involves dripping water for hours on end. And she was also subjected to hot and cold baths, where she was submerged in ice water and then in hot water and then in ice water. She was also submerged in water where she was held under for up to 25-30 seconds at a time and continually, repeatedly told that she was going to die, and until she was subjected, they were able to control her in a means to disassociation. She was basically broken down to the point where they had her disassociate. And she was also given electric shock treatment, which involved up to 15 electric shock stimulations in a row, accompanied by mind control phrases that were to condition her mind. And at different times they came very close to killing her, because if you keep it up long enough, you're going to kill somebody. And a series of 15 electric shocks even scared her experimenters because they were afraid they were going to lose her. And it would take several days for her to recover so she was even capable of speaking. On other occasions, she was put in shackles, and with a winch, her arms and legs were stretched to the point of pulling her arms and legs out of their sockets, which was another form of torture. She was beaten with rubber hoses. She was given various drugs, and there are so many different types of torture, and it's so hideous it's difficult to talk about. One in particular was where they would put a clamp on her head and apply pressure to her skull so that they would be speaking to her at the same time they're doing all this, telling her that they could make her head split in half and that she was going to die. And death was a constant threat that was applied to her so that she wasn't sure from one day to the next whether she was going to die. And this went on for a period of years until 1958, August 1958, at Lincoln Park. She was also taken to Suffield, where they were doing experiments on adults with chemical warfare agents and biological warfare agents. In the total, there were 42 men and women died by these experiments, as Gail witnessed. She witnessed the death of 24 children at Lincoln Park itself. On May 17th, 1958, there were 13 disabled survivors of human experimentation still held in cells in the basement of the Lincoln Park research facility. These children were beyond being capable of being returned to the outside world because they would represent incriminating evidence of the severe abuse they'd suffered. So on the afternoon of May the 17th, they were all put to death. Their bodies were loaded into boxes and onto an Air Force truck and taken to the country for a rural area for disposal. Gail's father was present along with Dr. Bob Armstrong during this massacre, and an unidentified man who we don't know who he was. Gail's father was squadron leader Eric Perkins, and he was in charge of the security for these programs.
How were they killed? How were the children killed?
Bob used a hammer and spikes, and he drove. One child was given a spike through their forehead. The next child he would put a spike through their heart, and he alternated heads and hearts until all 13 children had been killed. Then he laid them out on the floor to allow them to bleed into the drains, and then their bodies were put into 4 coffins and trucked to the country for disposal.
Could you say who Bob Armstrong was?
Dr. Bob Armstrong was given responsibility of human experimentation in Canada during this period from 1950 until 1958. He was given a rank of officer in the Royal Canadian Air Force, and he was given free access to military bases coast to coast in order that he could do his medical experiments. He was also captured Nazi war criminal, so his name, Robert Armstrong, was an alias which was given when he came to America to hide his true identity. I believe Dr. Armstrong initially would have worked for the Americans and was on loan to Canada, as there were other personnel on loan from England, one of which included a woman by the name of Dr. Janet Lee. Dr. Lee was Dr. Armstrong's #1 assistant at Lincoln Park. She was from England. She could be remembered as someone very well known around the base because she was very hard to miss. She drove a small green sports car, and she had a very large brown and white dog which she called Circles. And it's believed that Dr. Lee never did return to England because it's suspected that she herself was murdered sometime in 1958. In 1956, a fellow by the name of Charles Jackson, who was a military policeman with the RCAF at Lincoln Park, decided that he'd seen and heard enough of what was going on there and was going to blow the whistle. He was attempting to get evidence to expose what Dr. Armstrong was doing, and he got caught. So he was taken prisoner by Squadron Leader Perkins and Dr. Armstrong, and later that same day his wife was also taken prisoner. His wife was executed at Lincoln Park, and Charles Jackson was later executed on the Friday at the end of the week in a private residence outside of Calgary. His wife Jane died on October 16th, 1956, and Charles died on October 18th, 1956. And ever since, the military have denied that anyone by the name of Jackson was ever a resident at Lincoln Park or stationed at Lincoln Park.
But you have proof to the contrary, don't you?
Yes. And on going to the public archives in Calgary, it was discovered that Charles and Jean both lived in Building 11 on Lincoln Park Air Base. And they were real people. They really did live on Lincoln Park, and they really were murdered, and their existence was covered up. Consequently, the military claim to this day that they did not exist, despite evidence to the contrary. And
could you tell a bit more about the Nazi SS connection with Dr. Armstrong and the Nazis that were involved in his circle in Alberta?
Bob Armstrong was a Nazi officer during the war. He performed, by his own admission, thousands of human experiments on Jewish prisoners. It's undoubtedly he would have been executed at the end of the war if he'd been taken prisoner and taken to trial at Nuremberg, but he didn't. He was allowed to escape. Prosecution was brought to America and given a new lease on life with a new identity, and considered an asset by the American intelligence and the British and the Canadians, that he would continue his experimental work as he did during the war. And he was considered an expert in cardiology and psychiatry and various other aspects of medicine, and was given full cooperation to continue his research. He did extensive experimentation on everything from open heart surgery, various new surgical techniques, neurosurgery. He did drowning studies. He did starvation studies. He did dehydration studies. It covered the whole map. He was doing experiments with radiation. He was trying to change the color of children's eyes. He was doing genetic experiments.
So he was carrying on the experiments that were happening in Auschwitz and places like that.
Yeah, the same experiments. He did just a continuation of the programs, which were considered valuable to the Allies after the war, under the pretext that they were doing this to protect us all from the Russians, who were supposedly doing the same thing.
Could you just tell a bit about when you went to the government and the whole thing that happened after January 1994?
In 1994, I went to my member of parliament, who was Lynn Hunter at the time, and expressed my concern over what had taken place and what we discovered. Lynn Hunter, in turn, went to the Minister of National Defense, who was Tom Siddon at the time. This is in the fall of 1993. Tom Siddon ordered a ministerial inquiry be undertaken. In the meantime, of course, there was an election that fall, and he and Lynn Hunter did not return to office. In January '94, the military police undertook an investigation under their new mandate as the National Investigative Service, and proceeded to investigate the charges, the allegations of abuse, murder, torture, abduction, etc. And the officer responsible at that time was his name was Daniel Guisseau, Sergeant Daniel Guisseau, and Sergeant Guisseau telephoned me to get initial information. He later telephoned me several days later to report that he'd been to the Canadian Archives and retrieved files concerning my wife's treatment at Lincoln Park and Moose Jaw, etc., and that he had a great deal of difficulty bringing the files to his office because there were so many of them. It involved a large volume of paperwork, none of which was had been taped or put onto micro processing, like a lot of the information is. This was actually paper files.
So it confirmed that she was at Lincoln Park, and didn't it also confirm about Bob Armstrong?
He confirmed Bob Armstrong was the officer responsible for the whole thing. He also confirmed that Janet Leigh's existence. He could not confirm Jackson's existence. He also confirmed her father's role in the Air Force, and he also confirmed that Gail was subjected to human experimentation, which he had the files in front of him detailing that medical experimentation. There were boxes of files confirming that medical experimentation. Now, what became of these files, no one is quite sure. Whether they returned to the archives or whether they were shredded, I don't know. But within 2 weeks, Sergeant Guisseau had informed me that he had finished his investigation. He was going to recommend compensation be paid to my wife. He was going to ask his superiors for permission to make a trip to our home to meet with us. He wanted to show us some of the files he'd recovered from the archives, and he would be doing this within the next week. Within the next week, I telephoned Sergeant Guisseau and asked him whether he had been able to get permission to come and see us, and he informed me that he had not. He would not be coming to see us. He also informed me that we had never spoken concerning files or any other information. He said to me the only 2 people that I could find were he told me that he could only remember finding a couple of the people that I named. Now, I'd only named a couple of people, so the whole conversation became so absurd it was almost meaningless. That basically the idea was that everything was in denial. Nobody was going to admit to anything. No files were going to be shown to anyone because now they were claimed that the files didn't exist. And in the file analysis, which was in April of 1994, the final report says that Squadron Leader Eric Perkins was a fine gentleman, a good husband, a caring father, a wonderful officer in the Air Force. He had no criminal record, no mental illness, and he was just a first-class human being. And there was no evidence whatsoever that there was even so much as any abuse in Gail's life. So that was the final report. It also states that no one by the name of Robert Armstrong could be found in or out of the service. although there were 4 Robert Armstrongs living in Calgary during the 1954 to 1958, one of which lived 2 blocks away from Eric Perkins and his wife, Patricia Perkins, who is now today Patricia McDonald, was also a member of the Canadian Military Intelligence Team, and she was responsible for Gail's care and ensuring that she was at the various military facilities at the time specified, so that she could be subjected to the experimental processes to which she was subjected.
Did this Air Force sergeant, or not Air Force, but did the man you were talking to, did he confirm the existence of the Lincoln Park Air Force Base when even though he was denying it and everything, did he deny that the Lincoln Park Base existed?
No, he confirmed that the Lincoln Park Base did exist. It was a training facility for many years, and around 1960, Lincoln Park was demolished and recreated as CFB Calgary. Much of the property today is residential area. There's also a college on the property, which I believe is sitting right on top of the research and development facility to which all these children were subjected to horrible torture and eventually death.
What is the name of the college? Do you know?
I have no idea. It's the Lincoln Park. I believe it is Lincoln Park. Is in the name. There's also some kind of memorial there for the Air Force, but there's nothing there for all the children that died.
Can you talk about the treatment Gail received from Dr. Padser and what happened to him and that whole...
Okay, Dr. Padser undertook treatment with Gail in April 1985. He saw Gail weekly for a period of about 5 to 6 years. They were doing 2 to 3 hour sessions of psychotherapy. Dr. Padser did not hypnotize Gail. He did not have her go back in time or manipulate her. He did not even ask her questions. He allowed her the space to find her own way, to do whatever she needed to do to recover, to free herself from the past, and to carry on with her life. Gail had been subjected to so much hypnotism and mind control as a child and through her young adult life that she could, within seconds, regress to earlier stage, and this is what was revealed during psychotherapy sessions, a lot of which was recorded by myself and by Dr. Padser, by handwritten notes, audio tape recordings, and also video recordings, over a period of 19 years until March 5th, 2004, which is the day Dr. Padser suddenly died, which was very unexpected. I had seen him 2 days earlier, and he was in wonderful health. He was looking forward to a year of all kinds of things he had planned. He was a person who took care of himself. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke. He kept fit, he worked out, he exercised, he was a runner, and he suddenly dropped dead on the morning of March the 5th, 2004, while he was getting ready to leave to go to work in his office in Duncan. It's very difficult to prove that Dr. Padser didn't just die of a heart attack. He was 67 years old at the time, but it is my opinion that Dr. Padser's death was somehow cold. There was more to it than just his heart failure, because he was the only credible person in our lives who could verify what had transpired in his office over the period of 19 years. He was also the only person who could verify his interviews with ICMP between 1994 and 1998. He also spoke with military police from Ottawa.
Could you tell us what he asked the RCMP and the military police?
He expressed his concern to the RCMP that very serious crimes had been committed. He felt they needed to be thoroughly investigated, and that these events did occur. Of course, he expressed that he was the doctor. He was not there. He did not witness any of this. He could not be absolutely 100% sure that everything happened exactly as Gail said it happened, but he knew enough about his own work and his own experience to know that there was a very real validity to what Gail was saying, and whether there were variations in the actual events and what she was recalling was quite possible. But he also expressed his deep concern that very serious crimes had been committed and that these needed to be investigated. The RCMP, of course, were not cooperative. Either was the military police. In fact, Dr. Pazzer was ridiculed by the military police and told that if he knew anything about psychology, he would know this wasn't possible. Of course, this is all ludicrous nonsense, but the military police were just trying to put a little bit of intimidation into him and a little bit of fright, and they didn't achieve that. The RCMP tried the same thing, but
when were they talking to him? How long before his death?
He spoke to them initially in 1994. He'd also spoken to the RCMP in 1993. It was on his suggestion that I went to the RCMP. He felt that there was a certain degree of danger involved in talking to the military without the RCMP's involvement, which he had new people within the RCMP because he also worked for the judicial system in evaluation of people that had been through the courts.
Do you know the names of any of the people in the Mounties or the military that he had spoken to?
He spoke with Sergeant John, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank right now. He spoke with Sergeant Daniel Guisseau of the military police. He spoke with Sergeant Newman of the military police. He spoke with numerous people in the RCMP. He also wrote a report for the RCMP in 1997, which is in a file on Salt Spring Island in the military RCMP station there, or was. The files that had been accumulated between 1993 and 1997 were inadvertently destroyed. They were disposed of.
His files?
The RCMP.
The RCMP's files of what he reported to them were destroyed.
An officer from Salt Spring Island went to Victoria, had previously requested access to these files. He made the trip to Victoria to recover them. He wanted to study the case to find out how it affected what was happening at the current time in '97. When he arrived, he was informed that the files had been purged accidentally. He expressed some concern of how did this happen. He was told that they must have been mislabeled because all the files are color-coded with labels that this was a homicide investigation, and it was supposed to remain on file active file for 20 years.
Who on the Salt Spring Island detachment? Do you have the names?
That was Constable Joe Penny, who later was transferred to the Nanaimo detachment, and another officer that was involved with us at this during that time was Corporal Jaquette of the RCMP. Constable Penny was quite surprised and confided in me that he could not